Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the Australian government's gas plan will help re-establish a strong economy as part of the government's JobMaker plan, making energy affordable for families and businesses and supporting jobs as part of Australia's recovery from the COVID-19 recession. Senator Malcolm Roberts joins us from Pauline Hanson's One Nation. Malcolm, nice to see you again after a long weekend here in Queensland, but I presume you're working very hard.
Yes, we've been doing a fair bit of travelling and listening, Mike, but it's good to be back with you. I'm in Canberra today. We flew down last night.
Oh, aren't you lucky?
Yeah, fabulously lucky.
Look, the Prime Minister recently announced a gas plan to support jobs growth. Do you think this is proposed to replace government support for coal-fired power stations?
What we've got going on in this country, Mike, is a bit like the joke about the two hikers in the Rocky Mountains. They come across a grizzly, and one of the hikers turns and runs flat out away from the grizzly. And the other hiker just promptly sits down, takes off his backpack and starts putting on a pair of running shoes. And the first hiker, who's 50 metres away by now, says, "What are you doing? You've got to outrun the grizzly." He said, "No, mate, I've only got to outrun you." And so that's what's doing. They're both pretending to be to be in favour of climate change or supporting the climate change. Neither have got any evidence. And what Scott Morrison is doing is very, very clever. He pretends to have policies that will deal with climate change, but he also has to keep his other side of his party on board, which is supporting coal. And so what he's trying to do is to come up with something in the middle. He's trying to put on his running shoes to outrun Labor on both sides, to not do as badly as Labor, but not do as well as Labor. Not do as well as Labor in terms of supposed carbon dioxide reductions, but not do as badly as Labor in terms of carbon dioxide reductions. And so what he's done is he's charted a middle course, which is gas. And this is the same ideologically driven nonsense that's driving policy in this country and driving us broke. It won't make much difference at all because we will still have absurd renewables at 20 to ultimately 30% under the LNP. And wherever renewables come in, or I call them unreliables, Mike, they drive up the price. So all he's doing is trying to get a bit of reliability in there, a bit of price reduction, but ultimately it's the unreliables, the renewables that will drive this price. We're in a hiding to hell here.
One of the many complicated elements of the plan involves negotiating with state governments, and I'm trying not to laugh here, to access greater supply. Now, the question is, how difficult will this be? I would imagine it's just going to be a walk in the park. I mean, you've got supportive premiers such as Palaszczuk, Dan Andrews, McGowan. I mean, they're all easy people to deal with.
There's something, it's fundamentally very difficult. And I think the government should stay out of state affairs because we have got the underpinning tenet of our constitution is competitive federalism, where each state does its own thing, and majority of services should be provided under the constitution by the state governments, and that sets up a competition between the states. So I go back to Joe Bjelke-Petersen, who removed death duties in Queensland and death taxes, and what that did was it attracted a lot of people to Queensland to retire because they knew that if they died in Queensland, they would leave more money to their kids. That then forced the other governments, state governments, to abolish death duties as well. And so we had the abolition of death duties all over the country, which improved our efficiency. So that's what should be happening. But what is happening is we've now got competitive welfareism. South Australia won't develop its energy resources and went into unreliables, wind and solar. The economy fell over. The government started helping it. But meanwhile, it was left South Australia. Victoria is abandoning brown coal-fired power stations, and their prices are going up. And they're now getting electricity from New South Wales and ultimately from Queensland. So what we've got is these states abandoning their cheap forms of electricity and going into higher forms of electricity. And what the government is trying to do is to try and help them. The federal government is trying to help the states reduce their prices. Well, the federal government should just stay the hell out of it and let the states become basket cases. And those that become basket cases will suffer a correction of people and businesses leaving, and eventually the voters will wake up and turf that government out. That's the only way it's going to happen, because what's happening right now is we're just going to have taxpayers at the federal level subsidising the other states. And if you look at JobKeeper, I'm going on a bit here, Mike, but it's really important. If you look at JobKeeper, Victoria made a mess of its quarantining. And what did the federal government do? Helped it out with billions of dollars. So now we get rewarded. The states that destroy their energy sector have, like South Australia, and also not running very well, South Australia and Tasmania, they now get money from the GST from places like Western Australia. Western Australia gets 37 cents in the dollar for each dollar raised in GST. South Australia gets $1.20, I think, and Tasmania gets $1.20, something like that. So they are recipients, and they're paid to drive their states into the ground and run them poorly. That's what we've got to get away from, competitive welfareism. The federal government should stay out of it.
Now, there's talk of a Green New Deal, which is very alarming, especially with the US at the moment. Tell us about the Green New Deal proposed by our good friends, the Greens, the sensible ones, climate activists, big corporate rent seekers in a number of countries, including Australia. Now, they're all quite similar, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They're basically a social, control. They run off things like racism. They run off things like poverty, which are just fabricated. I mean, there is poverty and there is some racism around, but it's not endemic. And Donald Trump has exposed that. We're not racist in Australia. We do have some racists, just like the Koreans have racists, the Japanese have racists, the Chinese. But we're not a racist nation. And what they're trying to do is get control of the social agenda, fabricating problems, and that's what the Greens are very good at doing, and the Socialists are very good at doing, to get control of the agenda and then get control of the population. This is just socialism under a different mask, under a nice, pretty green mask. It's nonsense. It's just socialism, which will lead to more poverty, more control, and ultimately to poverty for everyone.
The cost of the plans are truly incredible. Where do you think the money would come from? Just as if you were asked this question just in the street, somebody says, well, where are they getting the money? I mean, the US, for example, Joe Biden's talking about in US dollars over a 4-year period is talking about 2 trillion US. That's about 3 trillion Australian. And he wants zero emissions by 2050 and from the power grid 2035. And here the Green New Deal says they want it within 10 years in 2030. So where do they get the money, first of all, to make this program that won't work happen?
They get it from productive people. That's where they take it from. People who are productive, farmers, miners, manufacturers, what's left of the manufacturers, tertiary sector workers, that they take it off people. Everyday Australians will pay for this. They'll pay for it in higher costs. They'll also pay for it in higher taxes, and they'll pay for it in decreased efficiency. That's the real problem here. And what we're seeing is a transfer of wealth. But if you look more closely at the details, Mike, you'll see what's been going on, and that is that we will be paying as taxpayers and as consumers for infrastructure which will be handed over to private owners. We will bankroll, we will pay for the assets, and the assets will be handed over. We will subsidise the development of unreliable alternative energies, and those will be then handed over to the new owners. Because that's what's going on with the subsidisation. We are just buying the asset for other people, and quite often those large companies that own these assets are foreign. We are subsidising the Chinese to come in here, and they're smart business people, and we're the fools. We're subsidising the Chinese with subsidies for wind turbines and solar panels in large solar and wind complexes, and then that drives up the price of our electricity. We export those jobs then because our manufacturers fall over with high electricity prices. We export those jobs to China. I mean, the Chinese are winning hand over fist here.
The Green New Deal, I mean, this is very alarming. It's something we can just talk about, but the time frame is 10 years' time. If Biden gets his way, he's going to relax it to basically 15 years' time. His first impact is going to be on the farming industry. Apparently, the cows they're quite destructive when it gets windy. But why? And you see this around the world. There seems to be a real whack around the head for the actual farming industry when it comes to climate change. And I just don't understand it, because if you impose restrictions and extra costs to the farming industry, then everything else goes up.
You're absolutely correct, and very few people know what you just said, Mike. And I'm really pleased to hear that. We've been bashing on about this for quite a while, and I'm so grateful that you are raising it. What this exposes and reveals is what's really going on. This is not about controlling cows. This is about controlling farmers. This is about controlling their land, and in fact about stealing their land. It's already happening in this country. We've got so many pieces of legislation that are predicated on the nonsense, the absurd myth that farmers are destructive to the environment. Farmers are being treated now as criminals, literally, and I mean that. I can give you an example. Farmers are being treated as criminals. And so what they're doing is they're trying to control the use of land, which is stealing farmers' rights to their use of their own property that they have bought and paid for. And it's about control of land. The same thing is happening under the guise of climate to control people who own land and homes on coastal property. And they're being used now to control people in some areas of Sydney, some councils in Sydney. They have regulations now as to how much paving you must have, how much grass and bush you must have compared to paving in your backyard in Mosman City Council, for example. But this is done to control land, because when they control land, they control you. And so this is an old communist trick, and it is about control of land. It is about control of the main sources and main processes for generating wealth, the energy. It's also about control of water, the resources, the means and means of production. That's what they're doing. That's just communism in another form. And what we're seeing is coming in as socialism. But socialism always invariably leads to collapse or tyranny, or it leads to communism, which is also a form of tyranny. So that's where they're going. These people are Fabians that are pushing it on a very gradual basis, and now we're starting to see it accelerate. But make no mistake, this is about getting control of people's lives and control of people's assets.
Interesting also, there's no distinction really between the left and the right, whether ALP or on the Conservatives in say, Australia, in the US, Republicans, Democrats. There's this the melding of terrible ideas.
Yes, there is, because what's happened with the United Nations that's been pushing this, and by the way, if you for those people who don't see what I see, the United Nations is pushing this. The Greens adopt it. They're the foot soldiers, the useful idiots for the United Nations. But in America, there has been pushback. The state of Alabama has banned, through its lower house, its upper house, and its governor, banned the spending of money, taxpayer money, on Agenda 21 implementation. That's the United Nations Agenda 21. That's what's driving this. Other states are working on it as well. I think, and some counties in America are banned working on Agenda 21. The Liberal National Party membership in Queensland have a policy that says no money to be spent on Agenda 21. Of course, the federal government, even though it's Liberal National, doesn't have to take any notice of what the grassroots says, and they don't. But there are 3 policies on the LNP books in Queensland banning Agenda 21. So that's what's really going on, and so we have to be very mindful of that. And what happens is that those policies are driven from the United Nations. The Greens adopt it, and then the left wing of the Democrats, the left wing of the Labor Party, then worry about losing votes to the Greens, so they adopt the policies. And then the Liberal Party is worried about losing some of its votes to the Labor Party, so they adopt the policies. And in the end, we have that same old story with the grizzly bear. And we have both parties running away from the grizzly bear. That's and one of them's got running shoes on, and the other one is trying to fit. Sorry, one of them hasn't got running shoes, and the other one's trying to put them on. It's all fabrication. It's all pretense. It's nonsense. It's just a sham. And we've got too many policies in this country that are driven by both Labor and Liberal that are based on no real data whatsoever. They're just fabricated. They're concoctions. Greens create a problem and then create a solution against that false problem.
Now, back to the Prime Minister's gas problem, which is probably another story, but we don't want to go there. Forecast for strong winds later on. The I had to use that, Malcolm. Price of gas, thank you. I got to hear the raucous laughter from no one. Price of gas in Australia has fallen from $8 to $10 a gigajoule to $5 a gigajoule due to COVID-19. Exports to Asia plummeted. In the US, for example, it's $3 a gigajoule. Now, I see the LNP trying to take credit for reducing the gas price. Do you think that's a bit rich?
It is a bit rich, unless they're taking credit for causing the COVID recession, which is bordering on a depression in some countries around the world. So that's what's caused the decrease in the use of coal, the use of gas, the use of oil, because there's less demand, there's less industrial activity, there's less transport, which is a huge user of oil and petroleum products. So that's all it is. So if they want to take credit for causing the gas price decrease, they need to take credit for causing the depression around the world.
Now, I went for a drive on the weekend. It was a long weekend in Queensland. I went to Hervey Bay and I saw a big pic of Pauline there. She got the guts to say what we're thinking, which means there's an election, October 31 in Queensland. Polls today, I heard on the radio, was saying that they're leading the ALP or the government 52 to 48. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think the LNP has a chance, or do you think they'll just slip by the wayside once again?
I was asked straight after the federal election, in fact, the night of the federal election, what it meant that Scott Morrison and the LNP got home in the federal election. And does that mean a sound of warning for the Labor Party in Queensland? And I said, no, not at all. Because if you look at South Australia, they had an atrocious Labor government there, and the LNP was so poor. The LNP was so poor as the opposition in South Australia that atrocious Labor government stayed in power for 3 terms. I think that was 2 terms longer than it should have. And in Victoria, we had Dan Andrews' government face the last election with 21 members of Parliament under charges or investigation for misappropriation of funds, taxpayer funds. And what did they do? They increased their majority in Parliament because, despite that hanging over them, because the LNP in opposition in Victoria is so poor. What we've seen up here is the LNP opposition is so poor up here as well that they don't provide much of an alternative. But when you look at the policies, the Labor Party has brought in the further stealing of property rights from farmers, as we talked about a minute ago. It's also brought in an abortion policy which enables abortion right up to full term. It's brought in new regulations which will destroy farming along the East Coast. It is just heinous what the Labor Party is doing, and yet the Liberals still can't touch it. But there's one other complication, and that is COVID, because COVID tends to help the incumbent because it's perceived as an external threat, so everyone gets behind the incumbent. We're starting to see Anastasia Palaszczuk seen as hypocritical and dishonest, and her Labor machine as exactly a heartless, ruthless machine that is running COVID policies that are hurting the state drastically and yet trying to look good. And it's fooled some of the people. Some people think Anastasia Palaszczuk has kept them safe. The reverse is happening because Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Labor machine are destroying this state's economy. What we need are sensible policies for managing COVID, not for being managed by COVID. And so we're gutting our state, but still the LNP is so damn quiet. And so what we've been doing is exposing the terrible policies of the Labor machine in the state. So I don't think, you've also seen, you asked me for my opinion, Northern Territory had a marked swing against Labor, even though that Labor is incumbent up there. So it's hard to tell what's really going on. I hear a lot of people as I move around saying that they are sick and tired of Labor and we can't have any more Labor. But they're not. They're all saying Frecklington's so damn poor. So I'm hopeful that we will get an LNP minority government that will have that'll have some sense about it or less damage to it than the Labor Party. But we'll need a strong crossbench from One Nation in particular, and that will be able to then put a check on both the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, because we don't have an upper house here. So we need the balance of power in a medium-sized party like One Nation so that we can stop the majority party or the main party from doing whatever it wants.
One final thing, Malcolm, little joke. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Deb Frecklington.
Deb who?
Look, thank you very much. All the best with your travels around Australia as you've been looking and talking and meeting all the good folks of Queensland and the outback. Great chatting, and we'll do this again in the next few weeks.
Same here. Thank you very much, Mike. Look forward to it.